One day, a little girl asked her mother, "Mom, how did the human race begin?" Her mom said, "Well, dear, it's like this. God created Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve had children, and that's how the human race began." 2 days later, the little girl went to her father and said, "Dad, how did the human race begin?" Her father said, "Well, dear, this is how it is. Many, many, many years ago, there were monkeys and apes, and those monkeys and apes evolved into people, and that's how the human race began." Then the little girl went back to her mother. "Mom, I'm confused," she said. "You said the human race began with Adam and Eve, and Dad said the human race began by monkeys and apes evolving into people." Her mom said, "Well, dear, it's really quite simple. I was talking about my side of the family, and he was talking about his." The title of my message today, as you've heard, is Love Yourself So You Can Love Others. Low self-esteem was a huge issue in my life, and I was an expert in covering it up with judgments of other people. I had no idea how essential it is to love myself. You might remember that when Jesus was asked, "What is the greatest commandment?" he said, "You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second one is like unto the first. You will love your neighbor as yourself." I always think it's important to remember that Jesus did not say to love our neighbors instead of ourselves. He did not say to love our neighbors more than ourselves. He asked us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And here's what the Dalai Lama said about that. And you may know that the Dalai Lama, his job is to be the epitome of love and compassion on planet Earth. The Dalai Lama said, "It seems that when some people talk of compassion, they have the notion that it entails a total disregard or even sacrificing of one's own interests. This is not the case. In fact," he said, "genuine love should first be directed at oneself. If we do not love ourselves, how can we love others?" Excuse me. Why is self-love so important? Because we can't give to others from an empty well. I've tried. Have you tried that? Here's something Dr. Joan Borisenko says in her book, Fire in the Soul. And Dr. Borisenko is a leading expert in stress, spirituality, and the mind-body connection. She said, "The universal psychological wound of Western culture is unworthiness, the soul sickness of low self-esteem that underlies psychological and religious pessimism." She said, "Most people are fiercely self-critical, having internalized the shaming voices of their parents. They secretly believe that whatever they do is not good enough, that other people would not like them if they really knew them, that they are selfish, bad, or simply not as competent as other people." And then she tells a story in another of her books. I'll read you that story because I think it speaks a lot about self-love. She said, "When I was a therapist in training, being supervised and receiving my own therapy in the process, learning to say no was a prime issue. My inclination was to give time and attention to practically anyone who asked. The only person I could comfortably say no to was myself. So one day," she said, "the supervising therapist used an entire 50-minute session, helping me learn to say yes to myself by saying no to others. He would make various requests, and whatever they were, I had to refuse. He said, "Will you please come over to my house and clean the bathrooms?" Joan said it was easy enough to say no to that. But when he got to things like, "I'm short of cash this week, and my children are hungry. Can I borrow $100? I was stymied, she said. Every fiber in my being wanted to give him the $100, even though I knew it was only an exercise. So she said, I began to justify myself and make excuses as to why it was impossible to give him $100. His response was short and incisive. He said, "Stop that right now. You don't have to justify yourself. You're entitled to your own decisions because you're a human being worthy of respect. Stop explaining yourself and stand in that place inside you where you know you are worthwhile." He continued, "You say yes so that people will love you. And that's the problem. Hear me," he said. "You are enough. You don't have to keep buying people's love." And he continued, "And if you won't stop, you will be useless as a therapist, a friend, a lover, or a parent, because you'll never be able to tell the truth or set appropriate boundaries for other people's behavior." When my wife Laura and I taught 6-month-long courses in personal transformation, self-esteem was always the first subject. We knew that people can't work on relationships, prosperity, or all the rest without self-love. When I was a child, I had the same thought that Dr. Borisenko says she had. The thought was, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. Have you ever had that thought? If so, you're not alone. In one of Jean Houston's books, she says, "Do you know what the definition is of a normal person? Someone you don't know very well." The truth is, the more we know you, the more lovable you become. I'm going to say that as an affirmation and ask you to join me in saying it out loud. The more you know me, the more lovable I become. Together. The more you know me, the more lovable I become. And that is the truth. In my childhood family, no one had very high self-esteem. In my childhood church, every Sunday, we would say out loud, "I admit that I am by nature sinful and unclean, and that I have sinned against God by thought, word, and deed." What an affirmation. So now I'm going to ask you to join me in a new affirmation. And here's what it is. I celebrate that I am by nature whole and divine. Together, I celebrate that I am by nature whole and divine. My parents thought that loving themselves was a sin, so they had no unconditional love to give to us kids. We all learned I'm loved for what I do, not for who I am. What passed for love was approval. So I became an approval-seeking machine. My wife Laura and I have been married for over 40 years, but this is the second marriage for both of us. In my first marriage, my wife and I saw 4 marriage counselors before we decided to call it a day. And one of those was a psychologist who wanted to see each of us individually before he saw us together. And when I saw him by myself, he had a question for me. He said, "Phil, what would your ideal day look like?" Well, it was a stunning moment, not because of the question, but because I had no idea what the answer was for me. I could have told him what my wife's idea was for a perfect ideal day for me. I could have told him what my parents thought an ideal day would be for me. I could have told him what my church thought an ideal day would be for me. I just couldn't say what mine was. And that was the beginning of learning how to love myself. Someone I know who's a hospice nurse and has been for 35 years said that the biggest regret that she continues having seen on people's deathbed is that they did not live their own life. Another reason self-love is so important is because unconditional self-love is the basis for all spiritual growth. Here's Louise Hay in her book, You Can Heal Your Life. She said, excuse me, when people come to me with a problem, I don't care what it is, poor health, lack of money, unfulfilling relationships, or stifled creativity, there is only one thing I ever work on, and that is loving the self. She said, I find that as we really love and accept and approve of ourselves exactly as we are, then everything in life works. It's as if little miracles are everywhere. Our health improves, we attract more money, our relationships become much more fulfilling, and we begin to express ourselves in creatively fulfilling ways. All this seems to happen, she said, without even trying, once we start loving ourselves. If we don't love ourselves, we also hold ourselves back from loving and serving other people. I used to believe that I could hate myself and then get others to love me over the top of my self-hatred. I don't know if you know that thought, but certainly was for me. But the truth is, the love we receive from others is not only a reflection of how much we love them, it's also a reflection of how much we love ourselves. Another thing I used to say is, I'll love myself when? I'll love myself when I lose 30 pounds. I'll love myself when I quit smoking. I'll love myself when I have a certain number of dollars in the bank. Do you know that one? It never happens. So these days, I have a new saying, which once again, I'm going to invite you to join me in saying. Here it is. There's no reason good enough not to love myself just as I am. Together, there's no reason good enough not to love myself just as I am. Many of us grew up believing things like, there's something missing in me, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm fundamentally different from other people. But the truth is, there is nothing missing in you. The truth is, there is nothing wrong with you. And the truth is, we are all fundamentally the same. You and I are both created in the image and after the likeness of God, which means we are expressions of divine love, divine power of creation, divine wisdom, and divine aliveness. And that is still the truth about us today. So here's another affirmation I'll ask you to join me in saying. Here it is. I am the equal of every person on earth. Together, I am the equal of every person on earth. Now, I'm going to ask you to turn to someone close to you, if there is someone close to you, especially if you're online, there might not be. But if there is, turn to someone close to you and take turns saying, you are the equal of every person on earth. Go ahead. Alan Cohen, in one of his books, said, Fascination is fertilizer. What that means is that whatever we're fascinated by grows. The universe says, whatever you're focused on, whatever you're fascinated by, have more. So, what are you fascinated by in yourself? Are you fascinated by what seems to be wrong with you? Or are you fascinated by what's truly right with you? Which gets more airtime in your thoughts? Your inner critic or your inner cheerleader? I came across a story recently about a young man named Scott who was on his way to church one Sunday morning to give his first Sunday message at a Unity church. And as he left home, first thing he did was he stopped at a coffee shop and got a cup of coffee to go so that he could drink this coffee on his way to church. So he got into his car with the coffee. He was going to, in the process of taking a sip, but didn't realize that the lid was not on the coffee securely. So it splashed all over his cream-colored pants. He had these wonderful cream-colored pants with a light blue shirt to go with his blue blazer. So here he had coffee all over his cream-colored pants. And he said, being a good Unity student, the first thing he did was to call on the name of Jesus. He said, Christ Almighty, how am I going to give a Sunday message looking like this? And then he said his ego began to rant and say, why aren't you more careful? Why are you so clumsy? What's wrong with you? And so on. He said that went on for a few minutes. And then he took a breath and he said, Scott, you've got 10 minutes before you're going to be going to this church and giving a message of inspiration and love. Do you really want to spend this 10 minutes beating yourself up? Or would you rather do it learning to practicing loving yourself? So for the next 10 minutes on his way to church, he practiced loving himself. When he began his message, there was, of course, no way not to include the story on the way to church because there were his pants with this big stain on them. So he shared what happened and how he went from beating himself up to loving himself. And he said afterwards, several people came up to him and thanked him for inspiring them in a wonderful way. And he said his message turned out to be much better because he spilled coffee on his pants than if he had not. We can. We can learn how to be our own best friend, no matter how old we are. Here's Dr. Bernie Siegel in his book, Peace, Love, and Healing. He said, self-love can be acquired even late in life, no matter your circumstances. He said, if you read The Velveteen Rabbit, you will learn what it is to be real. And you will understand that it doesn't matter if, quote, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. Because once you are real, you can't possibly be ugly or unlovable, except to people who don't understand. The more you practice loving yourself, the better life works in every way, including your ability to love others. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, tells a story, shares an experience, I should say, about something that she did every morning when she got up. She would swing one leg over the side of the bed, then the other, sit there for a moment, and then she would stand up and she would stomp first one foot on the floor and then the other. And then she would stand up, she was already standing. She would say in a loud voice, thank God I'm Margaret Mead. So I'm going to ask you to join me this morning in affirming that about yourself. Don't say, thank God I'm Margaret Mead. And don't say, thank God I'm Phil Smedstad, because that's what I'll say. Say, thank God I'm whatever your name is, but say it as loud as you can. Together, thank God I'm Phil Smedstad. So let this week be a time to practice truly loving yourself unconditionally. It really is the doorway to loving others and to successful living in every way. Namaste.